on the screen for anyone watching kind of illustrates what you're talking about. And quite notably, this decline seems to start when you're 30 years old, which is how old I am right now. So,
well, that's if you look at population-based studies at different age groups, we see about a 10 to 12% decline in what we call endothelial function per decade. So that means, nitric oxide is a gas. It's produced in the endothelium. So the endothelium is the single layer of cells that line every blood vessel throughout the body. So the function of these endothelial cells is to regulate vascular tone and to regulate, solute exchange and extravasation or transport of molecules across that endothelial layer. And so when your endothelial cells can no longer make nitric oxide gas, they no longer dilate, so the blood vessels become constricted. You start to get inflammation, you get stiff arteries, plaque deposition, and that's what starts cardiovascular disease or atherosclerosis.
So someone that's struggling with their nitric oxide levels at the moment, what kind of symptoms would they experience?
Well, we know there's a hierarchy, right? So the first sign and symptom of nitric oxide deficiency is usually erectile dysfunction. And when you think about this, when we're stimulated or we're about to have intimacy with our partner, we have to dilate the blood vessels. So erections in both men and women are dependent upon dilation of the blood vessels to get engorgement, to get increase in blood flow, and that's what an erection is. But if those blood vessels can't make nitric oxide, the blood vessels don't dilate, so there's no increase in blood flow, there's no engorgement, and that's by definition what we call erectile dysfunction. And it's the same in men and women, right? Whether it's the penis or the clitoris or the labia, you have to have an increase in blood flow. And without nitric oxide, there's no increase in blood flow. So that's number one. And we call that the canary in the coal mine. Because for years, people thought it was a lifestyle disorder, right?
Well, erectile dysfunction.
Yeah. But now it's recognized that it's a symptom of loss of nitric oxide and really an accelerated form of cardiovascular disease. So we have to focus on the vascular component of erectile dysfunction.
What other diseases are linked to nitric oxide?
Deficiency. So if you don't correct the ED, then what you start to see is an increase in blood pressure. And when you think about this mechanistically, so we have, a finite volume of blood that's pumping throughout our body every day, every second. And if you can make nitric oxide, the blood vessels are more dilated. So now we're pumping that volume through, more dilated blood vessels. But if we lose the ability to produce nitric oxide, now you don't get the dilation. Now you have smaller blood vessels. You're pumping that same volume of blood through smaller pipes, and simple physics tells us the blood pressure goes up.
Okay, so you're going to have cardiovascular challenges potentially.
Well, you're going to have high blood pressure or hypertension. And at least in the U.S., and I think these statistics probably are worldwide, but 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. And 50% of the people that are given prescription medications to treat their blood pressure do not respond with better blood pressure. It's because most of the drugs out there, whether they're ACE inhibitors, what's called angiotensin receptor blockers, calcium channel antagonists, the main classes of drugs that treat high blood pressure aren't targeted toward restoration of nitric oxide. So that's why we call that resistant hypertension. They're resistant to traditional therapies. And the reason they're resistant is because it's a nitric oxide problem. And those drugs aren't designed to affect nitric oxide production or improve it.
Was there an aha moment in your career where you became particularly interested in this subject? Because you could have committed your life to studying any facet of health or science, but for some reason you chose nitric oxide as the thing that you chose to focus on. What was that eureka moment?
For me, I was a student at LSU School of Medicine. This was the late 90s, maybe early 2000s. But a Nobel Prize had just been awarded for the discovery of nitric oxide. There were 3 U.S. scientists that were awarded the Nobel Prize in physiology or medicine in 1998. And I was very fortunate at the time. I was a young student, probably a first-year student, and Lou Ignarro, who had just won the Nobel Prize for the discovery of nitric oxide, came and spoke and gave a lecture before the student body. And I had a chance to have a conversation with him afterwards, and I was fortunate to be invited to have dinner with him that night. And he made a very poignant statement to me. He goes, if the scientific community can figure out how to restore the production of nitric oxide, it'll change the world. And it'll change the landscape of medicine. Because even then, was that 25, 26 years ago, that it was recognized that a loss of nitric oxide production is leading to the onset and development of many poorly managed age-related chronic diseases. So I go, that's a very profound statement from a guy who just won the Nobel Prize. But that was the first kind of eureka moment for me that stimulated the interest. But then my dad, and I talk about it in the book, dad is 76 years old. In 1984, he had a car accident. It left him paralyzed from the mid-back down. So the majority of my life, even as a kid, I was treating Dad's wounds, decubitus ulcers, pressure ulcers on his feet, on his butt. And he developed these non-healing wounds. He was diabetic, he was paraplegic, poor blood flow, hypertension, and he developed a non-healing wound, and no wound care doc that I took him to could heal this wound. So I started making a topical nitric oxide, and I've healed this wound within a period of 4 years of non-healing. I healed it within 6 months. Simply by giving nitric oxide and getting blood flow to that wound, killing the infection in the wound. And this was in a 60-something-year-old paraplegic, diabetic, sedentary old man.